Shade kept his eyes closed while his fingers danced over the guitar strings. Sweat drenched his beard. For at least a moment he was in heaven. Music was one of the only things remaining in his life that brought him peace, that quieted his pain and regret. It didn't matter that most of the tavern's patrons weren't paying attention to the beauty he and his fellow knights created. As long as the music stemmed from him, he was sane. As long as he could concentrate on the endless succession of chords, his mind didn't linger on her. A rasping tenor rose above the organized chaos of the song. Shade opened his eyes. The tavern was dim, lit by 6 sputtering torches affixed to the earthen walls. He glanced at his 2 brothers in arms, on stools beside him. Mish slapped his palms against the skins of his bongos, his long brown hair whipping about each time he flung his head to the side. Abe had his own guitar in hand, and he expertly strummed out a rhythm with his head thrown back, beads of sweat breaking out on the creased black skin of his brow, as he crooned the lyrics to a song they'd belted out 1,000 times. The tune reached the chorus, and Mish joined in with his warbling baritone. His brother's harmony was perfect, as usual. Shade grinned. Hi guys, and welcome back to the Guild, the podcast of the Writers, Artists, and Readers Guild. It's been quite some time since we put out a podcast interview. There's been a lot of other things going on, several other podcasts being recorded. You can obviously go in and listen to the Wrestling Guild that I and Nick Anderson do every week. And there's been a lot of other things going on as well, so there hasn't really been time or the possibility to do podcasts. But now we're back, and hopefully we'll have a couple of more coming on and more regularly. That was a reading from Soultaker, the latest book by Robert Duperre, who is our guest today. And we have a really good talk. We talk about so many different things. We talk about the need for writing. We talk about a little bit about self-publishing, and of course a little bit about the Soultaker, the book. There's quite a bit, and it's a really nice discussion. It's easy. Robert is easy to talk to and willing to speak about all things, all aspects of writing and inspiration and stuff like that. So it's going to be a really good episode. So enjoy it, and I'll see you on the other side.
Anyway, well, thanks for doing this. It was fun that we could have a little chat.
Thank you for having me. It's the first time I've ever done a podcast or an interview, so that's pretty neat.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, we're honored to be your first one. Because this podcast or our that I run with a few other people, it's kind of like more like for writers, by writers. Of course, we'll talk about your latest book, and because I think that's what your publisher wants. But I also want to talk a little bit about your writing process, so you can help, we can help other people that are in the same situation. Mm-hmm. If you have any tips or tricks. It seems like a lot of times it feels like, and you look at Twitter and stuff like that, there are a lot of authors or beginning authors that have like a lot of wisdom to impart. I don't know if you feel the same, if you do.
I don't know if it's so much wisdom as just oh god, just effort. That's really yeah. I don't know if there's really any wisdom in effort, but yeah, it's there.
Yeah. Well, what interested me, that really piqued my interest when I look at your kind of bibliography on Goodreads, because that's where you find those things these days, is that you've released several books before Soultaker. And am I right in assuming that Soultaker is your first book through a publisher?
No, actually, I wrote a series of books with David Douglas that was published through 47 North, which is an Amazon publisher, but Advance and everything. So that was my first foray into professional publishing. But this is my first solo effort into traditional, pseudo-traditional publishing, even though it is a small press. So
yeah, did you get it through? I mean, it seems like, to me, it seems like Ragnarok. I'm hearing more and more. I actually discovered them through Kickstarter. Through I think it was Bradley Beaulieu, who comes from the same town or city in the States as my family, and they were doing like some project, and then after that I've been hearing more and more about them.
They're a very interesting company. I mean, interestingly enough, the people that started it are actually no longer involved in it, and the people who ran those Kickstarter campaigns are no longer involved with it. They were bought out by Outland Entertainment, which was, I think, a comic company before they bought out Ragnarok. But yeah, so it's actually under new management, but it's still the same basic premises there. You know, finding interesting speculative fiction and pushing that out there. So I haven't actually read very many of the Ragnarok releases themselves. I got signed up because I knew one of the original owners, and he really liked if they could publish it. So
yeah, okay. So you didn't actually even go through like an agent at all?
No. Nope.
Do you feel like, I mean, a lot of people will say that an agent is important. So to you, it's not that important.
It depends on what you want to accomplish. If you want to make it in the big six publishing world, then yes, an agent is probably important. And I had one for a while, named Michael Carr, who was my agent when I wrote the books with Douglas, and his efforts were extremely helpful in getting the amount of money that we got from them right off the bat. So if you're looking to cash in, an agent is extremely important. If you're just looking to get your book published, it's not really that important.
Okay.
And plus, most publishing you can do yourself. I mean, to be honest, if I were to self-publish Soultaker, I probably would have made more money than I would make going through Ragnarok. But the point of going through the publisher in this point was to try and reach a different audience than I could reach on my own.
Yeah, because I'm interested in that. That's actually the first thing that I really wanted to talk about, was the process of going from the Rift series, which was you published yourself, to a publisher. Well, we can take 47 North, or if you'd like. I mean, how did that whole process? I mean, when did you start the whole thing of, making the decision of I want to write to be published, so I'll publish myself? How many times did you try to get published without self-publishing?
Okay, so when the Rift books actually took quite a long time to write. I mean, I took probably about 10 years off of the craft when I was in my early 20s, and just for a lot of different issues that had come up, just having a young family and everything like that. And so I didn't really get back into writing until about 2007. And then when I finally finished with the bones of that series, I started sending it out in like 2008, 2009, and I got zero nibbles on it. And so my wife, who's an artist, who's been selling her artwork independently for years, said, well, why don't you look into self-publishing? And she found, the CreateSpace platform is one of the first things she found in 2009 when I was starting to get extremely frustrated. And so I started looking at that, and then I found the KDP dashboard for Amazon, and I was like, this might actually work, because ebooks are a relatively new thing in 2009, 2010. And so, I found an artist that I trusted, that I've been friends with for years, and he did artwork, and I decided, let's just go out there and put these out there in the world and see what happens. And for a short time, probably about a year and a half, we made a pretty decent living, just publishing books ourselves. And a lot of people consider the early 2010s as being the old golden age of self-publishing. It's funny how things move so quickly in the technological world. That's only 7 years ago.
Yeah, I know.
And now that, and that era seemed to, last a really short period of time. But so the decision to go, when Dave asked me to write those books with him, it was actually the being traditionally published part was accidental, because my sales had already started to dip by that point, because of just simple mistakes I made because when you're self-publishing, if you don't have a consistent release date to keep momentum going, release date for subsequent books to keep momentum going, then your sales are going to drop off. And when I came to this I published the first 2 Rift books, and then I was like, you know what, I want to write something different and put the other ones on hold. And so I wrote a separate standalone book called Silas, and I published that. So there was a year between publishing the 3rd and 4th Rift book. So by the time I published the third book, with that year space, all of a sudden I didn't have any momentum for that series. So those last 2 books didn't sell as well as the first 2. And it was the theory of diminishing returns, or it was amplified with time. So we went from making probably $3,500 a month to making $300 to $400 a month, which it's a big difference. But so when Dave asked me to write those, the original plan was, he's extremely popular. He releases a book every month in his own world, or actually every 3 months in his own world. So we'll have, I'll be able to make a living doing this with him for a year or so. And he had gotten an offer from Orbit a few years before, but he'd signed a bad representation offer. And this is where you questioned about agents earlier. Always know who your agent is. Yeah. Because the representation deal he had was not conducive to making his money. Because I think they took an extremely large chunk of whatever revenues he'd be receiving. So he had to, as luck would have it, by the time I finished the first book in the Breaking World series, because it was basically me writing the books and Dave editing them.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So by the time I finished the first book, he'd somehow gotten out of that bad contract and found representation with Michael Carr. And then Michael Carr petitioned Orbit for his Shadow Dance books. And Dave said, well, why don't you throw in the Breaking World books I wrote with Rob, too? And Orbit wasn't interested in them, but 47 North was extremely excited about them because they had been trying to get Dave under their umbrella for years.
Oh, okay.
So that's how that happened. It was completely accidental. It was the timing just was right. If he'd gotten out of that contract 3 or 4 months after we'd finished collectively writing that first Breaking World book, then those would have been self-published.
Okay. So it sounds like at least the world of agent, of book agents and stuff like that can be very much like the early ages of record labels and representations were, like in the 40s and 50s, and even like all the way to like the 60s and 70s. You have artists like Jim Croce or Harry Chapin that had like really horrible deals, but you could make a living off of writing and self-publishing?
I couldn't make a living, but I could supplement my living.
Okay.
At that point, because making $2,000 to $4,000 a month is great, but when you factor in paying for advertising and taxes, the actual and paying my artist, because we had a royalty deal.
Okay.
Instead of paying him straight up, then my cut on that would be probably about $1,600 to $1,800 a month, which is great to live comfortably, but as an add-on to your regular income.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So what was the success behind the Rift series from being used? Because you said, you did pretty well. What was it? Did you do a lot of marketing? Is it about having an audience beforehand, or knowing a lot of people, or?
That was really, just like with most things that have happened to me, is pretty much luck, because it happened to come in at the time when in 2010 when you would look at the Amazon Marketplace for Kindle books, and you probably had 150 to 200,000 books, whereas if you looked at it now, it's closer to 2 million.
Yeah.
So it was much easier to get to gain an audience and to get visibility, and the networking within authors. So you would go to the Kindle boards or K boards, whatever it's called now, which I haven't been to in years, and collaborate with other writers, and they'd promote on social media. They'd push your book, you'd push their book, and then it kind of steamrolled from there. But also I think that might have somehow been the not somehow, but in ways been the downfall of that original system, because as you're making friends with other writers, you're also pushing people that might not have been as talented or good as you, and so you could turn off fans by promoting something that isn't quite up to snuff
on the level. Now, I mean, when you were, nobody would pick up your first books. I mean, did you question your own writing skills? I mean, as writers, I feel like oftentimes whenever you hand over something that you created to a publisher or to anybody really, that's when you start doubting yourself. I mean, you can sit there in your own room and you can say like, this is really good, or you can tweet it out and you can say like, I just wrote this awesome scene. But then when it's time to hand it off, you're just like, no, this absolutely sucks. Everybody's gonna hate it. And then when and when it comes,
let me just say, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say when nobody reacts. When nobody reacts, it's like that's what's true.
I doubt my ability. It doesn't take me hand to get off. I would be in the middle of writing every 5 minutes and go, does this suck? Am I any good at all? And it's kind of and then you go back and read it and you go like, oh yeah, this is pretty good, but will anyone like it? So writing is a crash course in self-doubt and self-deprecation. So for me,
I think for most, I think there are few. I mean, Stephen King threw Carrie in the garbage, and it was only published because his wife saved it. So, that's kind of the deal. I guess it's our cross to bear as writers. But I mean, did you when it didn't come back? Did you feel like just quit? Give up. Let's just give up. Or
well, I didn't give up on submitting. Yes, but give up on writing. I think, and from a lot of people I've talked to, they feel kind of the same way. And it's like, I guess where the act of writing itself can develop a sort of a mystical, psychosomatic condition in you, because I find like if I take a break and I go a week, just say I finish a book and I go a week without writing, and this was what it was like for the 10 years that I didn't do it. I would have trouble sleeping. I suffered from extreme insomnia in my early 20s to late 20s, just because, when I came to realize once I started writing, it's because I wasn't writing, because I wasn't getting out all the, it's kind of a, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a cathartic experience as much as it is a creative one. So I could never stop, even if I never sold another book in my life, I could never stop, because it's too self-therapeutic.
No, I had that conversation in an earlier interview, well, a couple of times actually. If you go back and listen to when I talked to Jonathan Fessmeyer and Brett Savary about writing almost being like a kinetic energy that you need to get out as a writer, because you're a storyteller, and when I don't write, and my wife will confirm this, it's that I make up stuff, like BM lies or just taking things a little bit too far in conversation with colleagues, Like you can do, and if I don't, so writing is my way to get that out, telling tall tales. Otherwise, I'll just do it, and people will start believing it,
And the you might agree with me with this, but when you start doing that, sometimes it can be, sometimes you at least I have just told a story to a coworker. It's just it's a completely made up story, just to see what the reaction would be. But then sometimes I found myself even, recently I was talking to my wife and I was talking about a different memory that I had, and she goes, "That actually happened?" And I thought of it like, no, actually, that was a story I told somebody. Hold on.
Yeah, I know. That's exactly true, because I'm the same way. And my wife will say that, like, I mean, she'll ask me, is that really true? And I said, yeah, it's true. So like, she's just like, no, I don't think it is, because you make up stories. And it's like, yeah, and there's been cases where it's come out that my wife has had to defend me in certain ways, because she just had to defend me, saying like, no, he makes up stories. You can't take what he says at face value all the time. But I'll do that with coworkers, definitely. And I feel, and I think I had that conversation with a coworker yesterday, as well as a student, because I'm a teacher. That we were at lunch and we were having this conversation about like that sometimes other people's lives they get kind of mundane or boring, so I try to spice their lives up by making up stories when we have a conversation. It's like, and then it is what it is, I guess. But I need to write. So how does your process look? Because I'm in a place where I work. I'm a teacher, so you take home a lot of work and you don't have that much time. I try to get about 1,000 words in a day in whatever. If it's working on a short story or working on a story. How does your process look?
Well, okay. My job isn't anywhere near as involved as teaching. Even though I come from a family of teachers, but I just work a regular blue collar, running a forklift in a warehouse job, and I'm alone for most of the day. So that pretty much allows me to do all my plotting while I'm there in little slow periods. And then when I get home, I just have my sheets of notes that I wrote during the day, and then it kind of guides me through the day. I try to get about 2,500 words a day in. But the whole process starts. I'll sit there for 2 days and type out an extremely detailed outline, sometimes way too detailed chapter breakdown, everything. And then of course, what's the plan? You with anything, you come up with a plan, you set your goals, then you start along the path of completing those goals, and then you throw out the goals. So that's basically what it is. Oh, I have a new idea. Okay, so I can fit this in here, and I can move this around. Oh, that's totally unnecessary. I can eliminate that. But it's mostly, and as with anything fiction related, the best things I think are always character driven. So as long as I need to know my characters first. I need to know who they are, what their motivations are, what drives them, what their personalities are like, and then after taking that, everything just can kind of fall into place. The only real hiccups come when the self-doubt starts coming in, and then you can sit there and stare at the screen and watch that blinking cursor and be hypnotized by it, and eventually close the laptop and go, I'll do this tomorrow.
How often do you talk about character driven stories? And I think any good story is character driven. Well, I'd hope at least. But do you find that you take people from your surroundings and place them in, like, you mask them in a way?
Yeah, yes and no. That was early on. That was pretty much how I got back into it, was taking people that I know, and putting not even really masking it, just putting them directly into the story, their personalities with a different name. And I started getting to thinking that's kind of a dangerous path to tread, because if you have a friend that you know their quirks and their ins and outs and what drives them, and if their personality it helps drive the story, and you can't, what's the word I'm looking for? You can't hold back the bad parts of their personality, and if the character you're writing is going to be a complete character, so those unsavory traits have to be in there and have to make an appearance at some point. And as I was working, I was thinking, this is, I had a friend, let's call him Ian, all right, and Ian's one of the main characters, and all I could think is, well, if Ian reads this and he knows this is him, I'm not a comedian that's making millions of dollars just tearing down all of my relationships. No. So I have a pretty small group of very close friends. So let's try and not do this. And so it was more. It evolved from there for every subsequent book I've written, where I've taken aspects of people's personalities instead of the whole that I've known, and just kind of mix and match them, and kind of the characters have become a composite rather than an actual person. So which is it sounds really simple and kind of a no duh type thing, but that I actually had to go through that process of realizing that I couldn't directly translate people I know into writing. So
because first of all, a side note on that, I mean, I think that's what happened to David Gemell, the old fantasy writer. He got fired from his job because he just took people right off. Like, I think it's his second book. He just he didn't even mask them. He just laid fantasy names out of their normal names, and he got fired from his job. But he did well for himself. I mean, he has an award named after him and everything. But but
he was famous. He was famous for that because if I remember correctly, didn't he take one of his biggest critics and turn him into directly into a character in the second John Shanno book.
Yeah, well, it worked for him, I guess. Or we can't all be that lucky. Put our bosses or whatever in our stories. But that's interesting. We had that. I had the conversation. I was at a writing course or a writing retreat, and here, where in Europe, in Sweden, where I'm currently living, and here in Sweden, it's all about reality. That's fantasy stories or science fiction had a boom period from the 70s to 90s, but it's mostly reality based, and that was the thing. They had the people I was talking to that I was at the retreat with, they couldn't wrap their head around creating a character that was completely fictional, or even based. Why would you write a science fiction story based on a character that exists? Because for them, it always had to be, my mother was an alcoholic, and I'm going to write about her. But always in that alcoholic setting. It can't be, a drunk space captain. So that I mean, I think a lot of people have a difficult time with that, creating or using aspects of true characters. At least here, where I live now. But yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, for me actually, it's when you talk about talking about take real life stuff. The whole reason that I love writing in fantasy and science fiction and horror is because you taking real life issues and making analogies for them through that medium is actually a more preferable way to confront the issue rather than taking straight on literary interpretations of it. Mainly because as for me personally, I live in an everyday life.
Yeah.
I've had friends that are addicts and alcoholics and abusers, and I've seen enough of that in my daily life. So I want to talk about those things, but talking about them under the umbrella of a fantastic environment is actually more preferable.
Yeah. Well, before we talk about your new book, I just wanted I saw that one of your inspirations was Terry Pratchett, which is very interesting because he was or is a big inspiration for me as well.
His Discworld books I just were hilarious. I've read probably about 6 or 7 of them.
Okay.
So yeah, they've just, I love this sense of humor and the way he invented a world. So
yeah, and how much, I mean, because I found in my own writing that this kind of like at times I put in a little bit of a tongue in cheek. Like certain things, like that everything doesn't have to be, even in a serious passage, there are a couple of things, especially if the way you say it, the way you present it, with a bit of an air of humor. Do you feel, and I feel a little bit in Soultaker, that was present. There was a small air of levity.
Yeah, that's and it's actually that's really the first book that I wrote that I tried to really incorporate that into the storytelling, because that was one thing. Sense of humor wasn't really a strong suit of mine. In my daily life, it's fine, but in my writing, it was everything tended to be super serious. And so I wanted to kind of emulate that, and actually I was introduced to Terry Pratchett through a friend of mine named Stoffe, who's a writer over in Britain, and his books, and he told me that his books were directly inspired by Terry Pratchett, and Steve was hilarious. So I decided to start reading the Discworld books after reading Steve's books, and yeah, and I've always, and of course everyone loves Douglas Adams. How could you not love Douglas Adams? So yeah, I wanted to try and have a little bit more levity and try to make characters that were just funny, and writing about characters that just have tossing playful insults back and forth is fine, but trying to find a little balance and putting some humor in there and humorous instances in what could actually be a really serious scene was a nice little challenge. So it is a way to challenge myself, because it's not something that I do naturally.
No, after he passed, I've been very into the Discworld books. I mean, I own all of them and everything surrounding it as well. All the things that have been put out. So I've been a big Terry Pratchett fan. So when he passed, I felt kind of like I haven't actually been able to read anything after his passing, because of the huge influence on maybe not the writing, but just kind of like because he produced so many books, they were always there. There was always like a next book you could write. And now I'm kind of like there's still kind of like 5 books left that I need to read, but I just haven't been able to bring myself to it quite yet. But if there's other people, there's Tom Holt and Robert Rankin, who are also British authors that are excellent, very funny in the same kind of Douglas Adams way. So if you ever get a chance to pick any of those books up, you should, even if Robert Rankin can be a little raunchy in his he's a little, I guess he was a very good friend with he was good friends with Terry Pratchett, and Terry Pratchett would often criticize him for being a little bit taking a sexual path.
No, I could I'll have to check those out. But the problem that I end up having now is with trying to be as productive as possible. My reading time ends up being squished, which which is irritating, because sometimes you can get tired of reading your own work.
Yeah.
So
I know.
My time which is why I'm so sad that summer's ending, because that was going to the beach in the weekend. That's my time to read. Yeah. And so with that coming to a close, being homebound, that's work time, being homebound. So yeah. I have to get better at tunneling out a time for myself to actually enjoy reading something that isn't work related.
Yeah, I understand. Because right now school has just started, so I don't have that many essays to read. So I have time to read other things. But as the school year progresses, it's just more and more essays, and it can make you really sad sometimes.
I can imagine.
But anyway, if we talk about Soultaker, and what really caught me when I read it was, and when we talk about books, my friends that run the website, and especially when we talk about genre fiction, is that genre fiction or novels overall is just a mix of different genres, really. A really good book is a mix of different genres. And Soultaker, I felt, was that. It's part, science fiction or dystopian world. It's a little bit of Western in the kind of traveling style, going places to places. There's a little bit of horror in there. There's an air of kind of like the sword and sorcery style fantasy as well. Was that what you planned for? You set out?
Yeah, yeah. I have a hard time writing in any one specific genre. They all end up blending in my own head, and and actually, you mentioned David Gemell. One of the inspirations for wanting to do this world was the Shanno books, because they have their issues, but they're extremely entertaining books, and John Shanno as a character himself was, kind of groundbreaking at his time. And so, I wanted to have kind of that Western feel, post-apocalyptic Western fantasy was really how I described it when I was pitching it.
Yeah.
So that's like you said, mixing genres is what any book is. There has to be an element of horror, has to be an element of, maybe not science fiction, but there has to be an element of fantasy and even realism in every book in every good book that you read. So, to me, it's kind of just that. I think that might help hold me back in certain ways as far as career-wise, because I can't really fit into, any real specific genre itself. And so, like the other book, like the kind of YA books that I'm writing right now, which actually tie into the Knights Eternal world, is they're called young adult, but they're not young adult books. No. And it's the same, high school realism, fantasy, horror. So it's kind of.
Do you So where did the germ of the idea for Soultaker? Because the world in itself is quite advanced. I mean, as the story goes, and I like the fact that there's no prologue that talks too intricately about, this is what happened and this is what we see, the kind of Star Wars prologue. But I mean, where did it come from?
All right, it actually started. Let's see. It's probably about 10 years ago that I was starting to think about this. Maybe even longer. Because I've always wanted to write an included story that I could span over different series and different books. I've seen other writers do that, and it's always fascinated me. I grew up reading Tolkien before I gave up reading fantasy. So it's like the intricacies of the world. So I've always wanted to do something like that, but I wasn't really sure how. And it was a few years ago, actually probably like 2011, 2012, where I was reading in my car. Actually, I think I wrote a blog post about this, where I was reading in my car at work, and I was reading Nightmares and Dreamscapes by King. And I was on the story, They Have a Hell of a Band. Do you know that story at all?
I know, I haven't read it. I know of the collection, but I haven't read it.
Right. Well, it's basically a story about a husband and wife that get lost in Oregon, in the Oregon wilderness. And they come upon this town that's populated by all dead musicians.
Okay.
And so I was reading that, and I'm like, oh, wow, this is pretty neat. I mean, the story is one of the weaker ones in the collection, but as far as the idea goes, the idea was original and interesting. And and so, I was driving home that night, and I think a Blind Melon song came on. I thought about Shannon Hoon, who died at 27, just like so many other people, and then it started thinking, well, where does the 27 Club go? So that's where kind of the germ of the idea came. I was like, oh, wait a minute, maybe they all entered this alternate dimension where they become like outlaws or knights or something, and that's where the idea really started. And I wrote a short story to see if it worked, and it did. It was funny, and it was which was completely unusual for me, like I said. And I was like, you know what? Yeah, maybe I can move on with this. And then it was a couple years later. It was actually after I finished the writing the Breaking World books that I started putting actual bones behind it, and I realized that I could use that setup of dead musicians being reincarnated as whatever they were being incarnated as that I was thinking of at the time. I could use that to tell my overarching story. So. And then I just built from there. I said, okay, this has to be post-apocalyptic, but I wanted to also have some epic roots, and religion's always been a big thing with me, as anyone who's raised Catholic, and steers away from the church. Religion, I think, a lot of times becomes a driving factor in creation. And so I wanted to create my own religion and have it be a reflection of everything that's going on in this world. And so that's really was the germination of it, was just this one moment reading a story in my car and going, that's interesting. and then everything went from there. So yeah, I mean, maybe not the most interesting origin, but origin nonetheless.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it is, and I think it covers a lot of the things that I was thinking about. The religious aspect and stuff like that, and often in these kind, and especially like in the sword and sorcery tradition, if you look at that, and even in Gemell's tradition, religion is usually a cause for concern, or organized religion. So it's a tradition that is very common, and I would think that. If somebody were to analyze Soultaker from a purely sociological standpoint, that would probably be what they would take away from it. What our times are today, and how it reflects our times. I think it's done very, very well too. It's not too preachy, to use a religious term.
No, it's because religion is a complex subject. So there really is no universal right or wrong when it comes to analyzing, discussing, or interpreting religion. So it does end up being kind of.
It's a touchy subject. I mean, it is, and I mean, you need to approach it gingerly.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, the thing is, it's interesting overall is that a lot of people who are conservative when it comes to religion often read a lot of science fiction and fantasy. So you have to kind of be mindful of them in a way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. I suppose you have to be mindful of them. I mean, if you're now, this will probably go against what I said about writing just in case a friend reads, but it's a less personal thing. But I can't write with in mind. Well, what if this certain person reads it? How are they? So it's kind of like I don't even have anyone in mind. I'll say what I need to say, and if they don't like it, they don't like it, or if they, And the funny thing is that my entire view on religion would probably be, even though I'm completely non-religious, is probably closer to the mindset of an organized religion than people who actually are entrenched in an organized religion. So
yeah. So how has the response been? I mean, to this, now being part of like Ragnarok and stuff like that. How is the response to the book been?
It's been good. I've got everyone that's read it has really enjoyed it. Just the couple people that I've seen and just reviewers on Goodreads have had a problem with the character that I knew they would have a problem with, which was Mish.
Yeah.
But other than that, it's still in its infancy. So every response I've gotten has been good, but I want more responses.
Yeah.
I really want to get to the point where I can say, well, people either love it or hate it. I would love to get to that point.
Mm-hmm.
So like I said, the response has been good. I want more. I want more response.
Yeah. Well, we'll try to make that happen.
Okay.
Yeah. So what's next? You were talking about your young adult books. Are those going to be published through Ragnarok as well, or are you? Do you have a book?
I'm currently self-publishing those. Actually, those are those. I'm working on the last book now. Like 2 are out, 2 are finished, ready to be published, and the last one I'm working on now. And then it's called The Infinity Trials. It's set in Connecticut in an undisclosed time frame.
Okay.
And modern day, generic modern day.
Okay.
Actually, that's something I as this is a podcast for writers, that's one thing that I could say that it would be maybe advice, maybe just I hate books that are set in a specific year.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
When I create something, I try to be as ambiguous as possible. Put little clues as to what time frame this takes place in, but stay away from concrete dates, because when you go back and it takes something away from someone as brilliant as Philip K. Dick, to go back and read, like this story takes place in 1992. Well, 1992 is now 25 years ago, and you know what I mean?
I remember. I remember reacting to that when I read Burgess, or actually when I saw Clockwork Orange, and they talk about that there's like the latest model 1996 the car they're driving, and I'm sitting in the movie theater watching it, and I think it's 1996, and I'm watching it just like, really. And I think, I don't think when you're writing the story or you're making the movie or whatever, you really think about that, because it's like that's so far in advance. But I know. You need to have some kind of suspension of disbelief or as a reader. But subconsciously, I think you pay attention to that. You think about that.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I watched the TV show Goldbergs, which takes place in the 80s, but they always say the year was 1980 something, which means that they can have like the New Kids on the Block and like the Never Ending Story in the same year, even though they're quite far apart.
Mm-hmm. Right. And like if you're setting a novel in a specific time and place, that's actually fine. If you're say your story is taking place in 1990 and you want to incorporate everything that happened in 1990, that's fine. But it because then I think in those instances the year is actually a character in the book too. But if you're writing a character-driven story, then that is where you don't want that to happen, or you just want to set it in generic modern day.
Yeah.
Then it's helpful 10 years from now, and in 2027, to have somebody pick up my book and think, oh, this could have written right now.
Yeah.
So that's part of it can get complicated, especially when you want to bring in the past of certain characters. But I think if being vague enough to pull that off, you can kind of trick people into thinking that you're writing modern day.
Yeah. So when are you looking at releasing these books? What are we talking about? Time frame?
Okay, so book 3 is supposed to come out at the end of this month, beginning of October.
Okay.
Book 4 is supposed to come out November 5th, and then book 5 is whenever I finish it.
Okay.
And then after that, I'm working on the last. I have to, because let's see. Yep. So I have a March deadline for the second Knights Eternal book, the follow up to Soultaker, and then that will be on the docket after this is writing Valbreaker and then Warmaker.
Okay.
And then that series is done, and I can move on to something I'm not sure what.
I'm sure you'll figure it out. I'm sure you'll see something or read something that'll spark your interest.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think we're gonna wind down here. We've had a great conversation here. Where can people find you or follow you on the internet if you're interested in having people follow you?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at Robert Duperre. You can find me on Facebook at Robert Duperre. It's pretty much just Robert Duperre.
Yeah, everywhere.
And you can find me anywhere.
Anywhere. I saw that your website is not up anymore.
No, I took that down because it wasn't worth it anymore. I have my blog, and that's it.
Okay, so people can find you on your blog too.
Yep. If I ever write to it again.
Okay. I'm sure people can enjoy your blog. Hopefully, it's not time or there's no date on it, so it's all like relatable all the time.
Yep, always. Exactly.
Well, Robert, thank you for coming on here and talking to us.
Thank you for having me, Chris. It was very enjoyable.
Yeah, and look forward to reading your stories in the future.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Well, that was the show for this time. I'd like to thank Robert Duperre for taking the time to talk to us. I had a good talk, and I hope you guys enjoyed it too. Pick up his latest release, Soultaker, at every reputable bookseller that you might find. Go in and visit Ragnarok Publications too for their latest releases. And I'd like to thank Gwendolyn Nix from Ragnarok Publications for setting this up. I would also like to thank you, No Copyright Sounds, for providing us with the music, and you'll find all that information in the show notes. Hopefully, it won't be too long until we get going with the next episode. Hopefully, I have something lined up, so that should be coming out soon. Follow us on SoundCloud or on YouTube these days. Please hit the subscribe button, so that people know where to find us, so we can put out more content. Don't forget to visit our website as well, and also, like us on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, all those social media outlets. But for now, I will talk to you when I talk to you. My name is Chris Mary Hultman, and this has been The Guild.